feminist and proud to call myself one.
We shouldn't be afraid of the word feminist. Men and women should use it to describe themselves anytime they want.
If we want to change the world, we have to invest in women.
When you see him sitting beside Angela Merkel, sitting beside Ivanka, he's like the International Woman of the Year almost.
A gender-balanced cabinet, for example, is a significant accomplishment and one that I am especially proud of. My own role models have been my mom. She ended up being a very strong voice for me for women's rights.
I am incredibly proud to have a partner in my wife Sophie who is extremely committed to women and girls issues.
Trudeau is still riding high in the polls, but is he as fab as all the hype suggests?
So wonderful to see you. Well, welcome, welcome. And as we saw from that video, you've never missed an opportunity to say you're a feminist, right?
I think it's really important. I think the more we talk about the things that matter, the more we're beginning to change attitudes.
Right, well, for 22 months now into your premiership, you've made that pledge and you've done some terrific things. Where have you found the biggest challenge, in living up to the pledge? I'm a feminist. I'm going to be a feminist prime minister.
I think we understand that in the day-to-day there's all sorts of challenges. And that actually, I wanted to say off the top that our thoughts are going out to everyone in Florida, in the Caribbean, who are dealing with a terrible challenge right now. And Canada will be there for them, and for Canadians who are having difficult times. We're working very hard because there's business as usual, and then there's business when things are exceptional. And being there for communities in need is really important for us. So we're certainly there. But in business as usual, there's still an awful lot of attitudes that need to change. We need to convince people that this isn't just about doing the right thing, it's about doing the smart thing. It's about recognizing that when you have a gender-balanced, diverse cabinet, you actually make better decisions, have better conversations when there are more women in positions of leadership. There are better outcomes for the business, for the economy. When you are empowering women in communities at the grassroots level in the developing world, you are getting better outcomes for everyone. And pushing that, which seems obvious for so many of us, but that there is such resistance to, visible and invisible resistance, requires a constant level of reminder. Anytime I sit in a room and there is maybe one or two women for a dozen men, it's something you have to remind yourself of. It's a constant remembering that the situation as it is right now is not fair. And even in a country like Canada, where you've seen there has been positive movement, there's still so much to do, and we cannot stop for a second to think, okay, we've done enough. No, there's always much more to do.
What kind of, that's great. What kind of incentives do you think you can put in place to encourage the corporate and private sector to just get on board and move ahead with this?
I think, obviously, the more we can highlight the successes of businesses that have created more parity and success because of it. But it's also pushing past the resistance, that sense that, I remember when we named a gender-balanced cabinet, there were a huge number of columns and articles and opinion pieces about cabinet should be based on merit as opposed to gender balance. And then as soon as we actually named the cabinet, nobody made that merit-based argument anymore because we had such exceptional, extraordinary women in position on there. But that sense out there that it's constantly a fight against the way things have always been done. And as we see regularly, people who have power are loath to give up that power. And unfairly, men have gotten much more power than women in business, in corporate situations, in life in general. And if we are going to elevate women, some men are going to lose some power that they unjustly have, and people are always eager to fight to maintain their privileges, sometimes in more case than people are ready to fight to gain those privileges. And that's where being a he for she champion at the UN, being someone who's very outspoken, that men have an essential role to play in feminism, in equality, because like it or not, we have power that is unjustly given to us that we need to use and put in service of leveling the playing field.
Well, Gloria Steinem once said, she once said, nobody gives up power without a struggle, and that is absolutely true, is what you're saying. Now, one of the things that, has been problematic has been the families of the missing Indigenous women who feel nothing much has happened, they feel, in this national inquiry about what has gone on there. This commission has been mired in misfires and personnel issues. Why do you think that has become such a beleaguered process for your administration?
Over the past 30 years, thousands, well over 1,000, if not thousands, of women Indigenous women and girls have gone missing. This is the kind of thing, and we often say this, if this was any other community other than Indigenous women, there would have been a hue and cry about it a long time ago. We made a commitment to launch a national public inquiry that would be focused on justice for the victims, healing for the families, and mostly putting an end to this ongoing national tragedy that unfortunately is still continuing. This is a hard thing. This is a big thing. Having a commission that will hear the stories of the loved ones who've lost their sisters, daughters, aunties, grandmas, and translate that into healing and action right across the country is difficult. And we're working with the commission, and there are a number of communities and Indigenous groups who've said, yes, this is exactly the right thing, and it's the right start, and yes, we have to work through the challenges we have, but it has to be done, it has to be done right. But the other thing is, we're not waiting until the end of the process and the report to take action concretely. We've put forward a gender-based violence strategy that does an awful lot around Indigenous women and girls. We're doing a whole bunch of things around sensitization and investments that are going to hopefully tangibly make a difference, including taking concrete actions on a particular highway that was known as the Highway of Tears. So this is a hard thing, not an easy thing, and it's something we are struggling with, but it's something we are definitely on the right track for.
Well, Christy Clark, the former British Columbia Premier, she has spoken a lot about the rank sexism that she faced in political life. And, many, many female politicians have talked about the savage online abuse that they get. Women in generally, when they stick their head up over the parapet, get this terrible online abuse and savage trolling. Do you think it's time to take any serious legislative action against these people, these kind of trolling? Is it the time to end the kind of the wild west of misogyny out there on the internet, or how do we address it?
Well, first of all, the answer is yes, we need to end the wild west of misogyny and trolling out on the internet, but you don't do that by trying to change the internet. You do that by changing attitudes. And I think one of the things that we've seen is, for some reason, the internet allows people this sense that they can say things that they wouldn't say in a physical public space or workplace. And it's those attitudes we have to go at. It's that shift in mentality. It's how we educate people. It's how we bring up our kids. It's how we model our behavior in the workplace. It's how we make sure that sexual harassment is unacceptable in the workplace, as are misogynistic jokes and water cooler talk. I mean, making sure that people are much more mindful of the impact of what they say on each other. I think one of the challenges around political correctness is people have learned sort of the language they can use so that they never get called out on what they actually think or believe. And what we're seeing on the internet, unfortunately, is an amplification of a very angry minority that we otherwise might not see, but that is definitely out there. So you know, we've taken a lot of kudos in Canada for some of the progressive approaches and the values that we espouse, but we're not a magical place. We still have the same kinds of pushbacks and nastiness that exist everywhere else around the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, Hillary Clinton, of course, is one of the people who's had the most abuse of any women leader one can actually think about. And in her new book, she actually says, her book's called What Happened, and she says, what makes me such a lightning rod for fury? I'm really asking. I'm at a loss. I think it's partly because I'm a woman. You've put a lot of women in power. I mean, what is your observation?
We worked really hard to reach out and get women to run, get women that we could be bringing up into cabinet, you know, for many years to get them in. And there's still a lot more work to do to get more women in parliament, to get the numbers up closer to 40%, let alone 50%. But we're also seeing a real challenge around retention. Women who've, you know, made it, who've succeeded, who've gotten elected, are now 2 years into it and wondering, is this really what I signed up for? Because of the nastiness, because of the negativity. We have a young MP from Mississauga, Ikra Khalid. She brought forward a motion against Islamophobia and ended up experiencing death threats and a level of online violence and commentary and viral videos against her that were quite terrifying. And she went through a very difficult time in which she was really questioning, well, do I really want to be an MP anymore? And that's, and we've been supporting her, and she's beyond that, or she's made it through that. But it really is a question that a lot of people ask. I mean, and we, even in terms of the pushback we put forward, Canada, we just signed our very first free trade agreement, updated, that has a gender chapter in it with Chile. We're the first G7 nation to have a trade agreement that explicitly has a gender chapter in it. And with Chile, Michelle Bachelet, of course, former head of UN Women, the president of Chile, who's, you know, very strong on that. And we said, okay, it's going to be really important that in the renegotiated NAFTA, we make sure that there's a strong chapter on gender, because it's such an important economic issue, because it's about labor rights, it's about healthy society, it's about everything, and we're going to be pushing hard to make sure that there's a strong gender chapter in NAFTA. And the pushback we're getting is actually not from south of the border. The pushback we're getting is from Canadian Conservatives, who said, oh no, this is about economics. It's about jobs renegotiating NAFTA. It's not about rhetorical flourishes of, you know, being good on environment or being good on gender. And to see that there is a supposedly responsible political party out there that still doesn't get that gender equality is a fundamental economic issue as well as many other things, that environmental responsibility is fundamentally an economic issue, highlights that we do have a lot of work still to do, even in Canada.
Well, yeah, and I mean, when you look around the world and see that so much of the world's problems are due to what can only be described as a sort of dangerous displays of macho overkill and transactional attitudes. I mean, look at the world with President Trump, Vladimir Putin, Erdogan, Duterte, Maduro in Venezuela. Do you think this is the sort of the last gasp of, caveman masculinity? And are you the new paradigm?
I don't know. I don't think there's anything new about this, and I don't think we're soon going to see a time where there aren't examples of outdated behavior and attitudes. I think what is obviously we're in a difficult time in terms of that reflection, but there are bright spots, and mostly we are seeing young people who perhaps thought that the fights of feminism, and you were talking about your daughter, are of a thing of the past, realizing that no, you can't take for granted the gains that have been made. There's still a lot of fighting to do for rights, for justice, for equality, whether it's whether it's specifically around women's issues or whether it's the new buzzword of intersectionalities, understanding that there are layers of discrimination that people go through, whether it's LGBT or race or gender or whatever. There are so many issues where we still have to fight for rights that we cannot be laying down our arms. And if there is a lot to be outraged about in the world right now, then perhaps that is going to give us, unfortunately, an opportunity to need to awaken and to speak stronger and to shift the kind of narrative. I mean, I have to say, as part of my generation, you know, I've friends with a whole bunch of, you know, dads in their 40s who are very, very conscious about being so much more engaged in raising their children, so much more focused on you know, sharing parenting work, so much, you know, different from the previous generation, and you know, who knows what the millennials coming along will be. I think there's a trend line that is good, but we can't just sit back and take it for granted. And when we see something that we disagree with, we have to think about, well, how we're going to counter it, and not just sit back and hope that, well, I hope that it works out next time in our favor. No, we have to be much more active about going out and making it work.
Well, how dangerous do you think America's increasing disengagement from the world is? And, you know, does it keep you up at night? Because, you know, Canada, as you said, can shine now in a way, and is it in some ways, in many ways, an opportunity for Canada, but there's only so much Canada can do.
I think Canada, one of the things to remind people of, I mean, our government's been elected almost 2 years. Canadians didn't radically or fundamentally change 2 years ago when the government changed. Canadians have always been, you know, value-driven, open to the world, thoughtful about the role we had to play in it, but you know, with lots of debates internally about the best way to move forward, like any other country. And looking at, you know, shifts in the way the world is engaging and the way the U.S. is engaging with the world, yes, gives an opportunity for other voices to step up, but there's no question that we need people to be working together. We need to bring in the United States on, you know, positive actions around climate, around engagement with de-escalation, around nuclear issues, around all sorts of things. And we are continuing to work with the U.S. to make that happen.
And I know that you have done quite a lot of meetings and so forth with Angela Merkel, right? So how do you find working with Merkel?
I think, and this is, I have to be careful about it because she's right now in an election campaign, and I don't want to comment on it because I will, of course, work with whomever gets elected. That's a line I've used a few times. But I do have to say that Angela is absolutely extraordinary as a leader. She is thoughtful, and a lot of people actually used to joke that, you know, could you imagine Justin Trudeau, you know, sitting down and talking with Angela Merkel? And I always said, well, that's sort of a mean thing to say to me, because, you know, she's thoughtful and serious and intellectual, and
no selfies.
I've got a nice head of hair, apparently. But I found from our very first meeting, you know, she is so interesting and thoughtful about so many things, and is so focused on what matters and not getting distracted by a lot of the little things that it's easy to get wrapped up in as politicians. That she's been a good friend and someone who, if the German people decide, I certainly look forward to working with for many years to come.
Well, let's, you know, talk a little bit more about, you know, your own sort of personal, you know, adjustment to this role. I mean, you know, now you're a prime minister. You have in your wife the amazing Sophie Gregoire. She has made that decision. The two of you have made the decision that she will be the rock at home, and you are while you go out and beat the world and everything you're doing. How does that sort of square with your desire to sort of see women out there in the workplace, and, you know, both of you working? And how does it also, how difficult is it to adjust to this new way of life with your young family?
Well, first of all, from my own perspective, I knew watching my father's example, my father in politics, and how he was a great dad, not so great as a husband in terms of where his priorities were, I knew that if I went into politics, it would be not with a wife, but with a partner. And it was essential for me that Sophie be part of my values, part of my strategy, part of my approach, part of what we do is we, not just me. And she is an extraordinary partner who challenges me, who pushes me. Actually, we were coming in today, and she said, "Okay, remember when you talk about feminism, it's not just about power structures and everything. It's also about how we live our lives and how you are as a man and as a dad, and how the choices we make every single day." And she's really good at reminding me of that. And you'll see her later today on a panel on perceptions and media. And yes, she does a little more at home than I do these days. Actually, she does a hell of a lot more than I do. But she is also extraordinarily active on a broad range of causes and issues, and is out there pushing and fighting, and is a constant inspiration to me. Challenges me on why aren't you doing more on this, that, or the other thing, and leads to some awkward conversations sometimes. And I keep saying, well, there's a minister you can talk to. I don't want to talk to the minister. I want to talk to the prime minister. I'm like, okay. But she's so strong and so passionate about things that I am uplifted by the opportunity and challenge to work alongside her as we try and make a better world.
Well, I recently read your mother's amazing book, right? And I know you've spoken often about how proud you are of her and how she had to get through this bipolar struggle with bipolar disorder, and really was a very disruptive to her life and, of course, to yours. I've actually was struck recently by, the anniversary of Princess Diana just passed, and we've heard so much about her struggles, and she died when her boys were young and so forth. Do you feel any empathy actually with that? Do you feel any affinity with Princes Harry and William, who had a mother who also had struggles of this kind, and who obviously they lost her to the tragedy they lost her to, and you didn't lose your mother; she stayed around in your life, if not in your house.
Yes, I mean, I think we are all a product of the challenges that our families went through, and whether it was a divorce or my mom's bipolarity or the other issues, it shapes and affects you. And certainly when I've had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Will or Harry or children who've grown up in public circumstances, there's always things to talk about. And I think that the one thing that tends to shine through with me is how present and engaged and loving, regardless of how difficult the situation was, the parents were able to be to the kids. And in so many examples, when the kids turn out great, it's because despite all the challenges, Will and Harry were showered with love. And that one of the things my mom keeps saying, just love them with everything you can as a kid, and you're pretty much on the right track for them turning out all right.
Well, your father used to impart moral lessons to you a lot, and he was outstandingly hands-on, really, as a father, wasn't he? Given that he was from the generation that he was, where do you think he got his feminism from? What did he teach you? Well, I mean, it is in a way, because he, I know that's an unusual thing to say about him, but I felt when I read the book that, that he was really very supportive as a father, anyway.
My father was amazingly supportive as a father. I don't know that he would have, or that we could call him a feminist. He was very old school. He was born in 1919, the year women got the vote in Canada, and but what he taught me and what he taught us was all about rights. It was all about being there to stand up, and it's not totally fair because he wasn't out and out, unequal, and it was just he had an old attitude about certain things. He was a product of his time, but the fundamental element of standing up for everyone's rights and never discriminating against them, regardless of who they are, what they are, applies obviously to feminism, but applies to minorities, applies to just about whatever you have. And what I have taken was his fundamental grounding in that, and applied it in a broader way in a society that is more ready for it. And I think as society evolves, we have to keep looking at where there are inequalities that are becoming visible because we have made significant gains, that now we can talk about sort of deeper issues and attitudes that still have to change. And that's part of the trend line. So I do credit my father for so much of the values and the philosophical framing. I just recognize that
he was a product of his time, as you say. Well, of course, as we mentioned that Sophie was a very talented TV journalist, and she did stop working when she decided to take over the family. Would you give up your job to stay home with the kids if she asked you to?
Probably not.
That's the ultimate feminist
job.
question.
Probably not this job. And that's something that actually we have had very real conversations about, where she has had to accept that what we are doing as a family through the role that I have now is really important. And she has had to put aside some of her dreams for how we would even raise our kids. I mean, she's always wanted to take our kids out of school and travel around the world in a sailboat and homeschool them and see the world. And I mean, movies like Captain Fantastic or Given. This is how we'd love to raise our kids. Except you can't do it when you're prime minister and family. So she has made significant sacrifices, but I would love in another life or another step of my life to be able to raise the kids and stay home. Yeah.
Well, that's very encouraging news, but not yet. Okay, not yet. Last question, I guess, is just what do you want to see happen in the next 2 years of your premiership? What is your number one? Like, I look back on it, I've done this.
There's so much, but the big one is around fairness, that everyone has a real and fair chance to succeed in Canada. That's what it's supposed to be about. And that, of course, you have to look at the people who are most vulnerable, Indigenous communities, new arrival immigrant communities, refugees, whole swaths of society, like women who aren't given the same kinds of opportunities that men have. I mean, the idea that my daughter might not have the same kinds of opportunities my sons could have is all wrong, and not just because she's incredibly smart. I mean, they're smart, but she's incredibly smart. How we actually make it so everyone does have opportunities, and we go at the hidden attitudes that are still there. The pushback, the big challenge of changing attitudes is still there, and everything I can do, everything we can do to shift the world in the right direction continues to be something that I'm going to work on in the next 2 years, but spoiler alert, I'm not going to fix everything, I guarantee. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. It's going to last generations, but a serious step in the right direction is really important. And actually, 2 years from now, I'm very excited that Canada's going to be hosting the world's largest conference on women's issues and empowerment, which is Women Deliver in Vancouver. We've won that, and I hope to see everybody there, including you, Tina.
Yay! Well, we'll all be there. We'll all be there. And I want to thank you so much, Prime Minister, for being a champion of women, for really giving voice to the need to raise women up and the smartness of doing so. Thank you so much for joining us, and really good luck with everything that's happening. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.